The air smelled of oil, rust, and dust, the kind of place forgotten by time. Off Route 19, a weather-beaten garage sat with its corrugated roof trembling in the wind. Inside, Henry, 72, worked alone. His hands, gnarled from decades of wrenching on Chevys and Fords, now trembled slightly. But not enough to stop him when the sleek black Charger rolled in late that afternoon. The driver was quiet, unreadable. Eyes like stone, jaw set like it had never smiled. He just said the engine was sick, then stepped back. Henry didn't ask questions. He never did. Not even when he opened the hood and saw modifications far beyond street legal, the kind of car that's been chased, maybe even shot at. Henry fixed it anyway. And when the man returned the next day, he simply nodded, handed over a thick envelope, and drove off. A week later, the same Charger returned, slower this time. The driver stepped out. Jason. But what he found stopped him cold. The garage was boarded up. A faded, closed indefinitely sign hung crookedly. Inside it was empty, stripped, silent. Then Jason spotted a faded photo wedged under the front door. Henry and a woman in a hospital bed. A note was scribbled on the back. "Thank you for giving me one last thing to be proud of. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This one might just hit a little harder than most." Henry Vaughn had been fixing engines longer than most men had been alive. His shop, Vaughn Auto and Tire, was one of the last independent garages in West Haven, a town too small for chain stores but just big enough for secrets. Henry wasn't just a mechanic. He was a keeper of stories, of scars people didn't want to talk about. Everyone knew him, but nobody really knew him. Since his wife passed 2 years earlier, Henry had stopped speaking much. He didn't need to. His work said everything. People came for the repairs, but they stayed for the quiet comfort. He provided a hot coffee, a slow nod, and no judgment. That's why when Jason rolled in without a word, Henry didn't blink. He could see it in the man's posture. This was a man running from something, or toward it. Jason didn't introduce himself, just left the keys on the counter and waited outside. The Charger was bleeding oil and stalling at idle. Henry worked until midnight, bypassing the chip controls, rerouting the cooling lines, and fabricating a new manifold by hand. He'd done similar jobs for local deputies, for traveling drifters, and once for a preacher on the run. He never asked for thanks. When Jason returned the next day, he gave a small nod, the kind men like them understand as gratitude. He handed Henry a thick envelope. "Fair price," he said. Henry didn't count it, just took it and walked back inside. But what Jason didn't see, what no one saw, was that Henry had also just received a call. The hospital. The kind no father forgets. Henry's daughter, Amanda, had been battling cancer for years. She lived in a hospice facility 2 towns over, and every week, Henry made the 2-hour round trip to see her. It was the only thing that still made him feel alive. That and the work. Amanda had been a fighter, a school teacher, the kind of woman who took care of others before herself. But the disease had worn her thin, taken her voice, and now, as the doctors warned, her time was drawing close. Jason's visit happened the same day Amanda's condition turned terminal. Henry never told him. He didn't tell anyone. That job, that Charger, became his distraction. A way to keep his hands busy while his heart cracked inside his chest. He took the cash Jason gave him and used every dime of it to cover Amanda's final care. It was more than fair. It was a blessing. He didn't even know the man's name, just that his engine came broken and left whole. And for Henry, that meant something. It meant maybe, in some strange way, God was still listening. Amanda passed away 3 days later, peacefully, quietly. Henry was with her. She squeezed his hand, said, "Thank you for not quitting," and was gone. The next morning, Henry closed the shop, took down every tool, packed every wrench. He left the benches, clean, the floor swept. Then he took the only picture he had left of Amanda, the one from her bedside, and placed it in an envelope. He didn't know if Jason would ever come back. But if he did, he wanted him to know. That repair meant more than money. It was the last thing Henry ever got to do for someone else. Jason wasn't the kind of man who revisited places, but something about that garage had stuck with him. A week after the repair, he found himself driving back down Route 19, unannounced. Maybe it was the way the old man had worked, or maybe it was the silence between them, unspoken understanding. Jason didn't trust easily, but he respected quietly. He needed to say thank you in his own way. But when he pulled in and saw the boarded-up doors, something sank. Vaughn Auto and Tire was gone. No warning, no forwarding info, no trace, just the photo under the door. Jason turned it over and read the handwriting again. Thank you for giving me one last thing to be proud of. No name, no date. But Jason remembered the lines on the man's face, the steadiness in his hands. He stood there longer than he should have. A few neighbors passed by but didn't. Stop. Back in the Charger, Jason stared at the horizon. Something inside twisted. He wasn't used to this, grief that wasn't his. But this man had shown him grace, and now he was gone. He went to the diner across the street, asked about Henry. At first no one answered, but when he said, "Old guy, ran the shop," the waitress nodded, said he passed last night, heart failure. Peaceful, they said. He was already hurting from his daughter's funeral. Jason didn't say a word, just sat there, coffee untouched. Then quietly he asked for directions to the cemetery. That night, under cold stars, Jason stood at Amanda's grave, then Henry's. He left the photo there, beside a wrench Henry had forgotten to pack. Some debts aren't paid in money. Some are carried. Jason stood still, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the fresh soil covering Henry's grave. The wrench, half buried beside the photo, glinted faintly in the moonlight. He remembered the way Henry had moved, slow, deliberate, proud. That kind of pride didn't come from money. It came from living a life that meant something, but Jason's mind wasn't quiet. Not now. He'd spent years staying away from people, from connection, from consequences. Yet a man he barely knew had touched something deep, something he thought was long buried. That wrench wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of work, of honor, of legacy. Henry hadn't just fixed a car. He'd given Jason a moment of stillness in a life filled with noise. Jason didn't cry. He hadn't in years. But as he crouched beside the grave, he whispered something low, words meant for the dead. You didn't owe me that, but I owed you this. He left something behind. A small envelope, folded neatly. Inside, a title. To a house in Vermont, untouched for years. It had belonged to Jason's brother before the war took him. Jason never had the courage to go back, but maybe now someone else could. As Jason walked back to the Charger, headlights from a passing truck lit up the graveyard fence. He paused at the gate, hand resting on the rusted post, looking back one last time. Henry's name would fade with the seasons, but the man had mattered. In a life filled with wrongs Jason couldn't undo, Henry had done one thing right. He'd made a stranger feel human again. Sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the sharpest mirror. And Jason wasn't ready to look away from it anymore. The house in Vermont wasn't just land. It was a second chance. Over the next week, Jason drove north, staying off highways, avoiding cities, letting time stretch out like an old wound, healing slowly. When he arrived, the house was weathered but standing, porch sagging, windows cloudy. But the bones were strong. He rolled the Charger into the gravel drive and turned off the ignition. For a long time, he didn't move, just stared. The last time he'd been there, he was 19, drunk on grief and running from a funeral that had never felt real. Now, 2 decades later, he returned not for himself, but for the man who'd shown him quiet dignity in the last days of his life. Inside, the place was dusty but untouched. Photos on the walls, a rusted coffee can still on the stove. Jason started cleaning that day, not for nostalgia, but for closure. He fixed what he could, one board at a time, the roof, the plumbing. He even built a workbench in the garage, thinking of Henry with every measured cut and bolt. He wrote a letter to the local VA, offering the house as a retreat. No fanfare, no name attached. Just a place for men trying to find quiet after the noise. At night, he'd sit on the porch with a flask and think of West Haven, of Amanda's grave, of Henry's steady hands. He didn't need redemption. He never believed in that word. But he needed peace. And maybe this was how peace looked now. Wood dust on his sleeves, calluses on his palms, and silence he didn't have to fear. For the first time in years, Jason felt still, and in that stillness something began to shift. But peace, as Jason knew too well, never stayed long. One crisp morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just his name in block print. Inside was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Henry in his garage talking to Jason, and written on the back, "You weren't the only one watching." Jason stared at it for a long time. His instinct screamed. Someone had been there that day, watching both of them, tracking him. He thought he'd left that part of his life behind, but ghosts don't stay buried. They wait. The next day, a black SUV passed slowly in front of the house. Windows tinted, no plates. Jason didn't move. He just watched. 3 days later, someone left tire tracks in the gravel, right next to his Charger. Deep, intentional, whoever. They weren't after the house. They wanted him. Jason drove into town, made a few quiet calls. An old contact confirmed it. His name had resurfaced. Not officially, not on paper, but whispered. The kind of whispers that get men. Followed, then forgotten. Someone thought he knew something, or had something. Maybe they thought Henry had left it to him. Maybe the Charger triggered it. He didn't know. But he knew this. The house was no longer safe for anyone else. So he made a call to the VA. Told them the property was off limits for now. They didn't ask why. Just said they understood. That night, Jason sat at the workbench and opened a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside, a burner phone, a knife, and a single photo of his brother, in uniform, standing beside the same Charger before war took them in different directions. Jason wasn't running anymore. He was waiting. The knock came just after midnight, soft, deliberate. Jason didn't move right away. He'd been expecting it. He stepped out into the cold, his boots crunching on gravel. The SUV was back. One man stood beside it, tall, lean, wearing a dark coat and no visible weapon. But Jason knew better. You didn't show up at a man's home in the dark unless you thought he had something you wanted. "You Jason Hale?" the man asked. Jason didn't answer. "We've been looking for something, last seen in a car you used to drive." Old mechanic had his hands on it. Jason crossed his arms. "He's gone." "I know, but before he died, he called someone." Left. A voicemail on a secure line. Said he saw something in your engine bay, something he didn't recognize. "You want to tell me what that was?" Jason's jaw tightened. He remembered now, something buried in the car's frame. Years ago, during a job that went south. A micro drive tucked into the wheel well, long forgotten. Henry must have found it, left it in the glove box. Jason hadn't even checked. "I've got nothing," Jason said flatly. The man smiled. That's what he said too, and now he's dead. Jason's fists clenched. That was the mistake, the bringing Henry into it, using his name like leverage. He stepped forward just once. "You made a mistake coming here," Jason said, voice like gravel. The man's smile faded, but he didn't. "Retreat. We'll be in touch." He got back in the SUV and drove off. Inside, Jason pulled open the glove box. There it was, a tiny plastic case, no label, just sitting there, waiting to be remembered. The past doesn't forget. And now, it was coming for him. Jason drove all night, southbound, no music, no stops. Just the road and the hum of a Charger carrying weight far heavier than before. By sunrise, he reached West Haven again. The garage stood silent, still boarded up, but he parked out front anyway. Inside, Henry's space was untouched. Dust floated in amber shafts of light as Jason stepped over tools and memories. He placed the microdrive on the old workbench and stared at it. He thought of Amanda, of Henry, of what this place had meant. A sanctuary. Not just for a car, but for a man like him who didn't deserve it. He knew what the microdrive held. Evidence, secrets, names. From a past life Jason had walked away from. It could bring down powerful people, or get others killed. And now Henry had paid the price for it. Unknowingly. Jason didn't cry. He acted. He mailed it anonymously to a contact buried deep inside the Justice Department. Someone he trusted once, long ago. Then he crushed the burner phone and drove the charger to the edge of town. He parked it in a field and walked away. Bayou. Evening, he returned to the house in Vermont. A place no one would trace, no roads led in without effort. He rebuilt the workbench, not for war, for peace, for Henry. That night he sat under the stars, same spot where he left the wrench. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and raised it quietly. To a man who fixed more than engines, no more running, no more hiding. If the past came again, it would find a man ready to meet it. But tonight, there was only stillness, and Jason let it hold him. Some men live loud. Others, like Henry Vaughn, live quietly, building their legacy not with fame, but with honesty, with hands that serve more than they take. Jason had met warlords, killers, and ghosts in suits. But none had left the kind of mark that Henry Haag did. A simple man with grease under his nails and grief in his heart, who chose kindness over caution. Henry never asked for anything, not recognition, not reward, just a moment to matter. And in giving Jason a safe place to land, he gave him more than shelter. He gave him purpose. Jason Hale was never going to be the hero, but he could be something else now. A guardian of quiet places, a man who knew when to step away from the fire and let peace, however fragile, take root. The past wouldn't vanish. That microdrive would change things. Maybe someone would come again. Maybe they wouldn't. But Jason wasn't haunted by the idea anymore. He had built something new, not in his name, but in someone else's honor. Henry's grave in West Haven became a quiet destination. Not a tourist site, not a monument, just a patch of earth where those who remembered him could pause. And every once in a while, a new wrench appeared at the headstone. No notes, no flowers, just a gesture from those who understood what he'd stood for. Jason never went back to that garage. He didn't need to. What mattered most had followed him home. And if you're out there watching this, maybe you've got someone like Henry in your life, someone who gave without asking. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and who your Henry is, because stories like his deserve to be remembered.